I'm Julianna Forlano. You're watching ACT-TV. So if you're a climate activist in Mississippi, listen up because there's a bill in your state that threatens 7 years in protesting, in prison, excuse me, for protesting polluters. How is this not criminalizing speech? I don't know. But climate reporter Alexander Kaufman is back with us to expand on what you need to know about this. Alexander Kaufman joins us regularly. He's a reporter at HuffPost, writing about climate change, environmental policy, and the politics of life on a warming planet that we are all living through. Alexander, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
All right. What's happening in Mississippi?
Mississippi, goddamn, right?
I was saying earlier, I wish if we ever got to say, like, hey, here's a story coming out of what's happening in Mississippi, and it would be good news. It's almost like rarely.
There are the occasional good news stories, but when it comes to fossil fuel infrastructure and laws defending it, I guess that may not be the case. So the story is that this week the Senate there passed a bill that had been in working its way through the legislature for several months now. It passed in the lower chamber in the House in March, and then it kind of reemerged last month and then passed overwhelmingly in the Senate on Monday and is now on the governor's desk. This bill is one of the many critical infrastructure bills that ramps up penalties for any types of protests that trespass and disrupt the use of things that are deemed to be critical infrastructure. In this case, virtually any fossil fuel infrastructure. So Mississippi is home to several refining facilities. There are associated pipelines with that, and under this, taking steps to stop the production of those facilities and intervening in that way would incur penalties that range from, on the lower end for trespassing, 6 months in prison and $1,000 in fines, to $10,000 in fines and up to 7 years in prison, plus for organizations that are abetting you. So in this case, you can imagine a Greenpeace, perhaps, or another type of direct action environmental group. They could be charged as much as $100,000 in fines, plus be forced to recoup the damages to the fossil fuel company for whatever losses that they incurred.
Wow. So basically, no more protests. Don't get in the way of the bulldozers. It's better than them running people over. I mean, I wouldn't put it, I was just waiting for the first time they actually said, oh, fuck it. They're just protesters. Let's kill them. I don't know. Hopefully that's.
There have been laws in this same sort of family of state bills that have passed over the past couple of years, particularly in the wake of the Dakota Access Pipeline fight, that have made it easier for drivers to run people over and not face liability in the same way. That, in fairness, is actually more in response to Black Lives Matter protests after Ferguson that have sought to block traffic as a means of demonstrating. But those bills do exist, and they have been shopped around often to similar constituencies as to these ones.
Okay, now my head is going to explode, Alexander. Oh boy. All right, let's talk about ALEC. You've reported that group, the American Legislative Exchange Council, has been behind a lot of these bills, but that there are many other powerful forces behind them. Can we talk about that?
Yes. So, the ALEC, which I'm sure your audience is familiar with, behind a lot of right-wing state-level legislative efforts. ALEC has been a major proponent of these bills. They helped to draft a model bill in 2017 that was then promoted around the country, particularly by oil and gas trade associations and by different oil companies. And it's notable that these critical infrastructure bills, of all of the different protest restrictions that have been enacted since 2015, when the Ferguson protests happened, and 2016, when the Dakota Access protests happened, that these critical infrastructure bills have been among the most successful. And what experts tell me is that is largely because they are being lobbied for by the extensive and well-funded network that fossil fuel companies have for lobbying in state legislatures. So in Mississippi in particular, The lobbying disclosures don't actually show which bills on which companies' lobbyists lobbied, but they do show which companies have been active in lobbying around that time. And they're Chevron, several different trade groups, especially the major refineries trade group were very active last year and this year. And in fact, the energy lobbyist in Mississippi who was contracted by that trade group was there's a lobbying disclosure that I examined that shows that they took out 3 of the members of the House of Representatives there who were key votes in getting this bill first passed through committee. And then those 3 plus a 4th who also attended this steak dinner at a ritzy steakhouse called Tico's in Mississippi were all solid yes votes.
Tico's, yeah, no, I've never heard of it. A steakhouse in Mississippi. This is not my area of expertise. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. This is all just very disturbing and upsetting. People in the chat, what should we ask Steve? How can we fix this problem? I mean, it seems like they're doing a lot of climate, giveaways and undermining of environmental regulations, which are basically corporate giveaways under the cover of civil riots or civil unrest and a worldwide pandemic. Your thoughts? Am I just making that up?
That they're doing this while there's the distraction of the pandemic.
Pandemic is a real thing. We're not distracted, but
that certainly has been the 2 things certainly appear to be correlated. I mean, there have been in March, right as the pandemic was starting to become a crisis, there were 3 similar critical infrastructure bills that passed and were signed into law in Kentucky, West Virginia, and South Dakota. You saw another one of these bills advance in Alabama about a month later. And then Louisiana actually passed with very little opposition a bill that would have set mandatory 3-year minimums for anybody peacefully trespassing on any land that contains a pipeline. It's notable that pipelines cover 125,000 miles of Louisiana. And that bill was thankfully last week vetoed by the governor there. But
unbelievable. Why Louisiana? Hey, I'm shocked, but not so much. Here's the main question coming from Kezbox. Isn't this unconstitutional because it stomps on people's First Amendment rights?
Well, I was actually talking to a lawyer about this just this week, and he made the point that very few charges have been brought up on these so far. And the reason for that is that many of the advocates of these things probably don't want to see it actually litigated. They probably don't want to see these things actually come up in a case that could lead to an overturn constitutionally. They are most effective as a bill to implement a chilling effect and to just have this threat in the background, particularly for organizations. He cited the example of, let's say in South Dakota, they're building a pipeline and Greta Thunberg wants to go there and hold a rally of some kind. Under the existing statutes, there is a possibility in which if somebody who happens to attend that rally takes some kind of direct action and chains themselves to the pipeline or does some other kind of civil disobedience, so there could be severe criminal or civil liabilities for Greta or for the organization that organized that rally in the first place. So these laws are most effective at really squelching any kind of protest in the first place and making protesters think twice. Although there is at least one case where there are some Greenpeace activists being prosecuted under this in Texas right now.
Oh, Texas! I'm shocked. Again, we were talking about potentially having, like, during the coronavirus, that blue state block break off. None of these states you're mentioning would probably be in our new America. Am I allowed to advocate for? I don't know. I'll have to check my laws.
It is. many of these bills have been, in fact, introduced in blue states as well, although they have not made it as far, notably. But it's worth noting that there aren't as many blue states that have, large fossil fuel industries. Pennsylvania, I guess, is a purple state, but it has a Democratic governor, and they have one of these bills is active in the legislature at the moment, but doesn't appear to be making any serious moves at the moment.
Do you think that activists will find a way around the laws that are created to make new methods of activism, or do you see them more likely to defy these laws and risk the jail time? I know what you just said is it's supposed to put a chilling effect, but I'm thinking like, let's send one woman in to sit on the back of the pipeline. You know what I mean? Secretly, without attaching the Greenpeace name to it, but you'd have to have a very brave person to do such a
Look,
thing.
I mean, I think that will always depend on the individual project that's being protested and the groups that are opposing it. I mean, certainly the urgency around this is becoming more and more clear to people, and the potential lethalness of new plants, particularly new plastics plants or other projects like that, to communities like those in Louisiana, for example, where they wanted to build or they are trying to build a massive plastics plant in an area already known as Cancer Alley. So I think when you press people into very desperate positions and limit their ability to express themselves in a clearly black and white lawful way, that you do invite some kind of actions like this. Although it's difficult to tell. I think we'll certainly see in the months and years ahead as these projects move forward.
Oy, it's so rapey. All I can hear is rape culture when we're talking about like, we're gonna force this pipeline into your neighborhood underneath where your aquifer is, and you can't even say no. It's sorry. It just certainly.
I know. I think that's it's an apt comparison as far as my understanding of these things go.
We're speaking with Alexander Kaufman, climate reporter for HuffPost. Hello, everybody who just came in from Touring News. Welcome aboard. If you're new here, I'm Julianna. We do progressive talk all day long. No, well, sometimes when we're on, but we're here now. Thanks everybody. And I ask you, if you're new to our channel, please follow. Hit the follow. Right? Alexander's here every other week to tell us the disastrous.
Come on, follow. You guys.
Yeah, you need to follow.
Subscribe, follow, and subscribe. It's a bare minimum you can do.
Come on. Alexander Kaufman can be followed at Twitter at Alex C. Kaufman. And when Alexander's not here, Steve Horn joins us from The Real News to also talk. I mean, there's certainly enough malfeasance around the climate that to have two climate reporters coming on at the same time.
The more the merrier. And for the record, I love Steve, and so I'm glad to hear that the audience is hearing from him as well. He's probably much smarter on this stuff than I am, to be honest.
No, actually, you guys both talk about two different things. That we were talking about environmental racism with him earlier this week in terms of like how California is doing police reforms, but they're not doing anything about putting fracking infrastructure in Black and brown communities. So when they say Black Lives Matter, and maybe you can comment about this, is the environmental aspect of how the U.S. administration is not valuing Black and brown lives is quite distinct. Would you like to comment about that?
I mean, I think that is overwhelmingly true, and is really, you're seeing that play out in the environmental movement at present, where you're seeing a lot of green groups who are historically very white trying to put a particular focus on this, because there's an understanding that environmental justice is an important lens through which to understand these things, and that Black and brown communities, poor communities in general, have been the ones to bear the brunt of pollution, and I think this is very notable at this moment, because you are seeing the oil and gas industry go on an advertising blitz and trying to advertise how woke they are and how many jobs they can provide in Black and brown communities. So being aware of that is, I
When
think,
I
right
think
now
about
more
people,
important than ever.
when I think about people who work on like big oil rigs, I think like Texas cowboys. I don't think like black and brown jobs being created for the community. Am I wrong? Am I not?
I think it is varied, but I think that pitching this industry as a as a boon to these communities and as a source of prosperity to these communities that are dealing with the very costly, both emotionally, psychologically, and economically effects of climate change and of air pollution, is a rather craven thing to do.
Hmm. Miss Rogers Live says, I think of shirtless white guys with big belt buckles. Yes, me too.
I mean, I think it's always important not to, I mean, look,
Good
the
joke.
movement
Good
to
joke.
create great. No, I know, I know. I always want to, I always want people to know that it's, the workers are the people that need to be defended, and who are going to bear the brunt, regardless of who they are, of what happens when these companies do go bust, and when there is, when the oil industry is no longer able to sustain the prosperity that it has offered them for a long time. But I
Mhm.
think I'm not trying to be a wet
No,
blanket.
no, you're right. I mean, when we think about the people who burned up on that giant rig in the middle of the Gulf because of malfeasance by the company, those are the workers who are unprotected by their own company. So hopefully they see that. Is there a union of like fossil fuel industry workers?
Yeah, there are many unions that include them, and that actually has been a major obstacle over time to doing a lot of different climate policies. That a lot of the big building trades unions and a lot of the other unions that include fossil fuel workers are obviously very opposed to climate policy that ends fossil
Even the
fuel
Green New
use.
Deal, which has like clearly like there's a job for you right there in the Green New.
They a lot of these unions are not fully bought into that yet. They're curious, but they are playing a little bit of a wait and see approach, and they don't necessarily believe that. A lot of them understandably feel that they fought a long time to have good contracts at fossil fuel jobs, and if you look right now at solar jobs or wind jobs, many of them are ununionized, and they pay half the wage that an oil rig job or a coal train job may pay. So, it's understandable in an environment where labor organizing rights and union rights overall have been so severely eroded that, nobody is quite willing just yet to give up what they have fought hard to hold on to in spite of that erosion of rights.
So you're watching Act TV. We're speaking with Alexander Kaufman, climate reporter for HuffPost. Act TV likes to use the hashtag do more than watch. Alexander, what can people do in order to support, I guess, the right to protest in Mississippi?
Well, I think just paying attention to this is something, thank you for covering this and for giving airtime to it. I know that this
Well,
is,
thank you.
this
The
is
reason we did is
you're,
because of what you did.
you take, you have always taken seriously these things, but, there, a lot of this stuff gets swept under the rug, and you have a lot of people who are the kind of self-anointed, free speech advocates who say that not allowing some neo-Nazi to speak on a campus means that we are ebbing toward fascism because people are unwilling to listen to different ideas, and yet we have had the steady proliferation of restrictions on the actual ability to express your opposition to things like this. So I think just being aware of these things and
I want to see
you know
those neo Nazis out there saying these Greenpeace people should be able to hug these trees.
Yeah, yeah, right. Where are all the NRA gun types when there actually are oppressive government rules against assembling and doing these things?
Well, the funny
Uh,
part is we actually want the same things. I hate, they want to be able to go to campus and spout racist, horrible bullshit. And we want to be able to stand in front of a pipeline so that it doesn't poison our grandmother's water supply. You know what I mean? Like it's sad. It's sad that at the base it's the same desire. Yes?
uh, I'm always wary of drawing any kind of comparisons to neo Nazis, but certainly I think it is. it is an unfortunate situation, and I'm thinking more of some individuals with very big platforms, the New York Times opinion page and elsewhere, who are gravely concerned about cancel culture, and yet don't really seem to find this to be an example of how cancel culture is actually playing out legislatively. So if your
You
viewers are
said it.
looking for something to do, I think paying attention to these bills and perhaps
How about
writing
writing a
to the
letter to the New York Times saying exactly that? You're so concerned about cancel culture. Don't you think these bills amount to cancel culture?
your words, not mine. That's not a bad
Yeah,
idea.
we're coming up with good ideas here on Act TV for action. If you decide to do that, do me a favor and hashtag it on your Twitter or wherever under Do More Than Watch. We're actively watching that hashtag. And I will have, if you write that editorial to the New York Times and you send it there, even if they don't publish it, I will have you on the show to do an interview about it. So, let's amplify the message, right?
Sounds good.
Thank you so much, Alexander. Don't forget to follow Alexander Kaufman on Twitter. He is at Alex C. Kaufman, Kaufman. We'll see you in 2 weeks. You never know what's going to have happened between now and then. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Fingers crossed. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. And if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We bring you the voices of, God, I hate to say the voices of resistance in this country because MSNBC calls themselves the resistance. Pacifica says everybody says they're the resistance. But, on Act TV, we're like a whole bunch of people who actually get off our rumps and do stuff.